Hi, well, I'm Matt Dodd. I'm over in Perth. And I think before we start, it's just nice for us to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which the event is hosted. Now, for me, that's the Whadjuk Noongar people, who are the traditional custodians of the land where I'm based. But we'd also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where our speakers and you as participants are all located. And we would very much like to pay our respects to their elders past, present and future. And with that, we'll perhaps go to Luke to give a little bit of a brief summary about what is Responsive Org.
Luke's in Melbourne and they're just coming out of lockdown. So just hang on a second.
Luke, over to you.
Can you not hear it?
Or maybe not.
Hey everyone.
I think we just lost Luke, but I hope he will be back in 1 second.
Just come back. Welcome to a live Teams event.
There we go. Can everybody hear me?
Awesome, we've got you, Luke. Yep.
That's the way. So it's great to be part of a Responsive Org event again, and a lovely thing about it this time is that it is online and we can include so many people from different parts of Australia and the world. Lineup of some terrifying speakers, or no, not terrifying speakers with terrifying stories. We've got Emma, Keshen, Rebecca Jackson, obviously Matt, who spoke earlier on, and Mark Woodrow is there from Engage Squared, obviously the same as Matt, and Kai Kerr. Great to have you all on board. And the Responsive Org is an organization, a movement that was created by Adam Bassoni, one of the founders of Yammer, back in about 2012. And Responsive Org is not owned by anybody. It is a movement. This particular session is fantastically hosted by Engage Squared, and thank you so much for doing that. But just to take you through what the Responsive Org actually is, and I know Kai, you've been to the Responsive Org conference, which gets held once a year, and you gave us some great feedback about what that is. But the Responsive Org was just basically Adam trying to get to grips with how society, civilization, the average person out there had all these tools in their phone, yet the organization couldn't keep up with being as responsive as those people who were visiting those organizations, those stores. So how could you build and learn and respond rapidly through open flow of information, encouraging experimentation and learning on rapid cycles as such, and organizing as a network of employees and customers and partners motivated to share the common purpose. And fundamentally what Responsive Org was built on and designed and thrives around is moving from the concepts of just pure profit to a sense of purpose, from just hierarchical to networking and networks and working like a network. From the concept of being controlling and command and control to empowering those individuals in the organization to be more autonomous. From the concept of locking things down by constant planning and sort of that fatigue of planning and staring into the headlights and getting stuck with have you planned enough, to working towards experimentation. And obviously last but not least was the concept of the silos in organizations, from that privacy, from privacy being the default. And I know we can talk about this because some tools still have closed groups by default, to being more transparent and working out loud, because fundamentally people like John Stepper, who wrote his book in 2015, who called Working Out Loud, was off the back of the responsive organization. So I'll just kick it off. Myself, Luke Grange, I work for a wonderful consultancy called One Point, which is head office in Paris. And we help organizations transform through design thinking and through design with a platform of technology that sits underneath that. But we are design led, and that's human-centered design. I head up what's called the collective intelligence practice, which is where I know that I'm not the expert in our customers' problems, in our customers' business, but I know how to accelerate finding out what those problems are and accelerating towards a solution which matters, the right solution, not just a solution. So that's who I am. I was also a customer success manager for Microsoft for a few years, along with Mark Woodrow. We were both doing that together. And I remember one of my horror stories was doing a Yammer launch at a large retail organization. And as you can imagine, they wanted a hard launch, and we were always against that. We always wanted to have, continuous soft launches of the different kinds of tools. So as you had early adopters, they didn't feel like they'd been using this in the dark, that they felt like it was continuously being revived. That's the way we like to think of it. But anyway, this retail company was going for a hard launch. They had this CEO up on the stage, and outside IT flicked the switch on turning this wonderful new communications tool on. And of course, Yammer has this preemptive window which it says, what are you working on right now? Or what are you doing right now? And that changed, by the way, and it changes over time. And they still do A/B testing on that. But what it was saying was, what are you working on right now? And a message came through, and it had all these sort of comma separated terms, and one of them I remember was Black Hawk Down, comma, excellence awards, comma, and the IT guy jumped up and down and he said, "We've been hacked." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he said, "We've been hacked, that somebody has infiltrated our organization and they're now putting all these things." And I was like, "Mate, you just got to take a step back, calm down." And he immediately went in and blocked this person from what they were doing. And within 15 minutes, we worked out that all they were doing was writing down what they were working on, and they were in IT, and they had a number of projects, and they were just comma separating their projects. And of course, that's just a small example of shutting someone down, but it just reflects the culture of the organization. I just wanted to throw that one out there before I pass it on to the next person. I'm going to pass it on to Emma. Emma, if you want to jump in and tell us some of your horror stories and introduce yourself as well, obviously.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me. My name's Emma. I am from Cricket Australia. I am the Technology Adoptions Manager here. My role is kind of around making sure our users across the country know how to use our tools and are getting the best out of our tools, and that's all Australian cricket.
I got a pin right now, date November.
And so that's kind of my role here. For me, one of my biggest horrors, particularly over the last year, is the unknown. And you can plan and plan and plan, and then a pandemic happens and there's nothing you can do. And everything gets thrown. If you think about that from a cricket world, we have had to reinvent how we're going to plan our season. Our off season was, right in the middle of the pandemic during a stand down period. Everything was unknown, and we're still going through that today. So we're still trying to figure out how to, launch cricket season and the likes in amongst all of this. And there's a lot of complexity with that. So you think about trying to bring in international players when borders are closed and fly them across the country when borders are closed. That's very difficult to do. But if you add that on top with the technology, everything has had to be digitalized. So the work from home was not an issue for us. We were ready and prepared for that. But it's the large events, the annual general meetings, all of these events that we have to plan for, and everything has to be digitalized. And so that comes with planning. But what my fear, and I guess the horror story with that is that people are running so fast and so last minute and in a panic manner that it becomes irrational thinking, and that's really scary. So you've really got to kind of calm people down and tell them that this technology is available and we can support them in that way. And you really do need to kind of show them how to do it and be as organized as possible. And you can't just flick things on anymore in the sense of, I'm going to, have an annual general meeting and I'm going to do it today. You really do need those pre-prepped sessions to make sure that everyone is presenting, is ready and prepared, and the last minute things just become a little bit of a chaos. So I'm finding 2020 as a whole, without going into the whole pandemic, is a chaos year. And so that's probably a bit of a horror story for us, is just that panic and that chaos environment that we're living in. And everything's changing. I'm in Victoria. We've got people in WA who, came out of COVID months ago. We've got people up in Queensland, and then we've got people, all across the world, and everyone's in a different stage. And so we're all facing different rules while trying to deliver cricket the same. And that's really, really difficult to do. So I think that's kind of our horror story there. And I'm hoping we have some questions around that a bit later.
Thanks, Emma. Look, great horror story. And I know you guys are in a rough predicament, both, because you're also international, and obviously internationally, there are some major concerns about what's going on right now. I think the one thing that you highlighted for me was when I was working at Microsoft, and we went into a government agency that was doing an Ask Me Anything. And I'm not sure whether everybody knows what an Ask Me Anything is, or an AMA, but it's basically when some high-profile individual in the organization goes onto Teams, onto Yammer, onto one of these enterprise social tools, and for an hour or whatever the set time period is, the organization gets to ask them anything, and they need to respond. Well, obviously in government agency, the questions were all scripted. The answers were pre-scripted, but the person in comms who was running it was really, really clever, I thought. And she sat there and she said, Luke, watch what I do. And she was on the keyboard. So the high-profile secretary, or whoever it was answering the questions, and she did use two fingers and she typed really slowly. And I wondered why she was doing this. And after about 10 minutes, this guy looked at her and he said, "Can't you type any faster?" And she said, "No, I'm not really good at typing." So he said, "Well, just move over. Don't worry, I'll do it." And he started typing himself. And that's exactly what we were trying to do. And I've used that subsequently. So if you have someone typing with two fingers, that, it's just one of those outs when somebody's trying to get the answer through. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump to an activity. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to ask everybody a question. So bear with me as I share my screen, because this is not the fastest computer in the world that I have here, but let me know when you can see my screen. And this is before we're going to hand over to Rebecca after this. So we're going to use a tool called Klaxoon, and there are two ways that you can engage with Klaxoon. You can either on your computer on a separate screen, or if you want to share your screen, type klaxoon.com. If somebody can put that into the chat window, I would appreciate it. So that's klaxoon.com, or you can use your mobile phone and use this QR code that just came up there, and just put a nickname in and go into Klaxoon. Once you're in there, I'm going to initiate something for you. So let me just give you a couple of seconds to get into the Klaxoon. I'll just do that. So a couple of seconds to get in there. And I will do the same as you're doing, just so I can see how quickly it goes. I know that sometimes people can move too fast in these circumstances. So the code is WP3 EYW6 and I hit go. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring up a word cloud. So just put your nickname in there and then click join. I'm just going to put a word cloud in. They call them live storms here. And just to say, how are you feeling about the current COVID/work from home situation? And we're trying to get one word answers here. See how you go. Something should pop up on your screen. That pink bar that just popped up on your screen there, click on that, and where it says idea, just type a word there, or you can separate them with a space and then press enter. So we're getting tired, great, nice, pleased to see that. Awesome, isolated, optimistic. I think definitely for those of us who have been in lockdown in Victoria for so long, we're starting to feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. This is super. This is great feedback here. Isolated, definitely coming through. And of course, that's only natural because a lot of the space that gets conjured up online when we're having these kinds of meetings. I was just having a meeting with Singapore this morning where silence is deafening a lot of the time during meetings, and you always have to feel like you're switched on when you're in online meetings. Energized, lonely, tired. This is wonderful. I'm just going to take a snapshot of that. Thank you so much for that feedback. It gives us a lot to discuss. And if anybody wants to discuss anything there, jump in.
Hey, Luke.
Yeah.
I know it's Halloween, but I reckon we've been Zoom bombed or hacked from WA. I don't know. I think we need to go over to WA and see what the hell's going on. There's something very weird going on in WA. Oh my God.
Oh, really?
I'm embodying my horror story, which is a Yampire. So I'm Matt Dodd underneath here. It's probably even more scary if I do that.
I didn't recognize you now that you've taken that off.
Shall I? And when we were looking at the sort of horror stories and some of the things there and those barriers to what makes an organisation responsive, two things went up in my mind. One was the thing called Yampires, which I'll explain in a minute, and ghostwriting. It's interesting that Luke shared that story about trying to get the senior person to actually type and do their own answers. It's something I am familiar with. I was the community manager at a financial services organisation for 7 years, and we certainly, when we were in the early days of Yammer, before we had single sign-on, it was very easy for, should we say, executive assistants to be posting on behalf of other people and ghostwriting. And I think that the horror for me with that was more that it was just so obvious. I used to go and welcome our graduate scheme, and we'd talk about Yammer and the way they could use Yammer. And one of the exercises I used to do was I'd print off these lists of Yammer conversations from different people, kind of blank them out and go, okay, which ones of these people do you trust? To get them to think about what the content was in the posts. And invariably, the ones that were from this senior leader that always ghost posted, these graduates picked it up straight away. They were, well, I don't really trust this one. It sounds too corporate. It sounds very clean. It's not right. I don't get any sense of a person from this ghostwriting. And I think, hiding behind that corporate safety net is something that just doesn't line up with the way that sort of Yammer works, and that idea of having an authentic leader and that openness and that authenticity and trust when we think about a responsive org. So it was something that I was always very conscious of, and I always would be coaching leaders around why it was important not to do this. I think there's steps you can take. I love the story about the typing. That's a great one that I hadn't done before, which I will take away. But for me, it was around setting that context and going, well, actually, you're not being present. Are you treating your colleagues in this organisation with the same respect that you want to be treated by them? By not actually engaging, by getting someone else to do it, you're not kind of showing that level of sincerity. And I think once people start to understand that, they can work around it. The other thing that I saw in that time, this idea of yampires, and it was these people that suck the life out of your network. Now, Kai, I know I'm looking at Kai because he has his little profiles with observers and engagers, but this was like a really bad observers, because the yampires I used to see would be people that would actually actively look on Yammer, right? So they would definitely know what was going on, and then they would actively seek out people's leaders and then moan to those leaders about the fact that someone was on Yammer all the time. So I had someone, I remember vividly, the person came up to me in a real state saying, I've just had my one-to-one with my manager, Matt, and I feel, he was saying I'm on Yammer too much, and what am I doing? Now, I said, well, you're not, he was a classic responder. He used to like lots of things. It spread stuff all through the network. It was great for us. He was one of the most engaged people on our network. So I went and had a chat with his manager, and the manager said, well, someone would have been complaining, they kept seeing him liking and replying on Yammer, and when did he do any work? And so I just stopped a minute and said to this manager, well, that person who's made that complaint, if they're recognizing that this person's on Yammer all the time, surely they must be on Yammer all the time to notice that. And he went, well, yeah. And I goes, well, have they actually contributed anything to the network? Have they contributed anything to the discussion? And he went, no. I said, well, clearly then, who's the person wasting time? Who's the person not adding value to this organisation? And the manager went, oh yeah, no, I can see where you're coming from. And I also said to this manager, the other thing is, do you have a performance issue with this person? No. Well, what's the problem? You perhaps need to get onto the network yourself and actually look what's happening and the value that this person in your team is adding to the network, rather than listening to this hearsay of this yampire who's sucking the life out of the network by observing all the time and then trying to erode it. And I've seen it a few times, and they're the toxic ones that you really need to try and identify early in your network, and have those conversations with leaders and say, if you're hearing these rumors, if you're hearing that there are these people that are on Yammer too much, then just have a little sense check and think, are they actually adding value to the organization? And if so, let's welcome them with open arms. And that's the whole essence to me about that kind of authentic leadership. So they were the two stories that sprang to my mind.
Good point, Matt, and thank you for those. And a lot of learnings just right in there is, what is it about performance? If they're still performing, then they're adding. So what I'd like to do now is to hand over to Rebecca. And Rebecca, if you want to introduce yourself and also let us know your horror stories.
I think I'm well known for my horror stories. Well known for speaking frankly. And now that implies that all my work is horror stories, which is not true. My name is Rebecca Jackson. I'm from NextDC. I'm digital workplace manager, and I've been doing this thing for about a decade now. I don't know whether that's a good thing or bad thing to say. But in terms of horror stories, it's not something us as a team kind of lead up to this, but talk about horror stories, technical issues, and can you hear me, and can I hear you, and can you see me, and can you see my screen? Is probably one of the current horror stories that we all have.
Yes, we can, Rebecca.
Can you see me? Wait, what? I'm sorry, am I muted? Is my headset working? I just bought a new one, by the way. But yeah, in all seriousness, I mean, that can be a day-to-day horror story for people in roles like, myself and Emma, where we will be getting plenty of calls from people when they have those small niggling issues. But I think kind of bouncing off what Emma was saying about the experience at Cricket Australia, NextDC was really fortunate that we were set up well when we transitioned to the new way of living, which is COVID. But like many organizations, we're now dealing with the challenge of all of this new technology and people screaming for the shiny new thing and people needing training for the thing that was just switched on. And what that highlights for me is just that general horror story about having to deal with something new and not being given the opportunity to appropriately plan, which is what Emma said in a nutshell. And while the tools are doing a great job of helping us improve things, and like as a Microsoft MVP, I'll be frank about the downfalls of tools, but also I do think the tools are great, else I wouldn't put my name out there for it. But IT switching things on, or even just the business going, right, they've all got Teams, now we need it, just do it, and we need it next week, or we need this particular feature next week, or even, well, everyone else rolled it out in 4 weeks, why can't we? So I think the answer to that, fortunately or unfortunately, is the answer it's always been, is to stick to your guns. I always love stories from Matt because he has great practical ways to talk to senior leaders about these sorts of issues. But sticking to your guns and going back to fundamentals, it's change management, it's adoption, looking at metrics and statistics. Yeah, sure, they rolled this out in 4 weeks, but I think many of us on the call will realise, or perhaps be in the situation where there are many, many organisations around the world who are now backtracking out of the tools they smashed in for COVID, or having to backwards engineer change management programs because their training failed. So that's the horror story for me. And the future is our roles such as ours will continue to be important in helping businesses navigate the ever increasing change. It's not going to stop. Can you hear me? Was I on mute
Yes.
the whole time?
Yeah, no.
Awesome.
I think that's the scary thing, isn't it? I think the scary thing is that I see so many people now with all of these tools being launched quickly that they're getting confused between adoption and transformation. We go, well, we've turned everything on, we're digitally transformed. We're now responsive, we're now agile, we're all these things.
Yep. And it's not just adoption and transformation, but adoption, change management, and transformation.
Yes. Yeah.
I love the one where it's like, oh, but our stats say everyone's on the tool. It's like, yeah, because you're Office 365 and everything signs you in automatically, and that's not a stat that we need. We want to know, how are people interacting and why are they interacting, and how is the tool actually benefiting them, and how is it actually transforming the way that they work. That's the story. It's not everybody's active, because that doesn't tell us much.
I'll tell you one of the horror things that comes to mind, and it's along the lines of what you said, Matt. They switch it all on, but in actual fact, the horror is when not everything gets switched on, and in Office 365. And I know that Qantas went through this for quite a while, and eventually, with Green Dot's help, they were a great consultancy that helped Qantas understand that Office 365 is a suite of tools that integrate and work well together. And I know that there's certain regulatory aspects that need to be around compliance, and there's certain reasons you can't switch certain things on and share certain stuff, but boy, does it work so much better when Office 365 is fully enabled.
Absolutely.
Now, Darren, you've had your hand up for a while. Very patient in the school classroom. Thank you. Would you like to chip in?
Yeah. Thank you. Just waiting for the unmute button to work. Sorry about that, guys. Thank you. I'm really enjoying this. I think this is a really good conversation, and I love having these sort of conversations with people from all sorts of experience. So I've been in the IT industry for many, many years. I currently run my own Microsoft 365 sort of consulting group. And I'm going to start with a little story and then move on to a question. Some of you, and I'm not going to age anyone here, but some of you will actually have been working at this time. Some of you may not have been. I'm talking about September 11, 2001. That was the time I was working at a financial place called AXA, National Mutual, AXA, and then became AMP. And what happened, I remember, was obviously the planes crashed into America. We woke up in the morning, we all looked up and scared as all get out. I was in the IT department at AXA. We went in there, and the first thing they did was they theoretically got their business continuity book and blew the dust off it theoretically, and got into action because it's a financial thing, and they had to work out what to do with the stock exchange for their finances, etc., etc. So that was my little interesting, I guess, horror story for them. It was interesting to watch. My question then goes to everybody else. When I was, as I've been through the IT industry, it's always being told, you know, you need a business continuity plan, you need a business continuity plan. I haven't heard that term being used in this COVID space. And I'm just wondering from different people, did they have one? Is it old hat? Is it something you should or shouldn't have anymore? What should be different than what we used to know as the old, you know, DR/business continuity? Anyone to answer?
I'm not sure how different it is for other organisations. So in NextDC, we're a data centre. So we absolutely have a business continuity plan. As soon as COVID became a crisis, before it was declared a pandemic, our business continuity plan went into place. So I can only speak on behalf of NextDC and other organisations I've worked in. I mean, I worked for Melbourne Water, I worked for Coles. Those sorts of organisations definitely have business continuity plans. They have to, and have to be able to demonstrate to either shareholders or the public that they do. So our plan was enacted from our facilities to protect the data centres, but also in terms of our transition to work from home, which for us was relatively smooth.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll chip in too. We also are the same. So while we're not a large organisation and don't have to do any of this stuff from a public eye, I think we've had enough events that are classified as crisis management at some point that we've got the plan in place, and we activated that very, very quickly. We then went into a different type of planning off the back of that, which is, once we went into the stand down period and, the planning, we kind of activated again in a different model with different people and the like. So for cricket, we definitely have it, and there's a Cricket Australia one, and then we have a national one, so that we're talking all of Australian cricket as well. So we do, whether it's as stringent as other organisations. We're not a bank, we're not those type of organisations, but we definitely have them. We've gone through enough instances where it's been needed over the years.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, again, companies I've worked for and worked with, they all definitely have business continuity plans. I kind of almost think of it as you could probably work out the companies that had the business continuity plans with this pandemic is because the ones that have just carried on. I think the ones that were highlighted are going to be the ones that didn't have it or didn't actively exercise these things or think these things through. That's where the issue arises. It's, no one talks about them because they all, they pretty much did work, or there was some thought behind them. So they kind of get that silent recognition. But I don't think people jump from the houses going, woohoo, we had a, business continuity plan and it worked. But that planning and that forethought really helps. But I think the difference now over a few years ago is that particularly some of these organisations that are a little bit more kind of forward thinking, the agility in the tools and that response is really helpful. So the plan is almost, we'll just get a team together on Teams and sort it out. That might be as simple as the plan, but the tools now that are available make those things a little bit easier to contemplate. And certainly I think those organisations that have already been, open enough to start thinking about, actually, it would be good if we had flexible working. And yes, people, we do trust people to work at home, and we don't need them in the building to actually trust that they're doing some work. We're certainly ahead of the game, I think, when it came to dealing with that. They had some of the policies perhaps in place, and they had some of the technology in place, so we're probably a little bit more flexible that way. But it was just funny. It did think that the stats on these uses and the way it is was actually making me think of Kai, but there you go. I'm sure he's got some stories as well.
I was just thinking there, I think there's actually what happened on 9/11, that kind of disaster where disaster really strikes, bang, and you have no opportunity to think or plan. Disaster hits right there. I think with the pandemic, we've all been, if you like, a bit lucky. We've had days, if not weeks, to go, oh, what are we doing about this? And there's a difference between that and then a building has exploded, and and half your team are not alive anymore. I think it's now that for me, that's kind of like a true disaster. So anyway, I think we've been fortunate that we've all had time to adjust, even though we had to adjust quite quickly. And I do appreciate you can argue, well, one thing is just 2 buildings in just 1 city, whereas the pandemic, that's global. But I still think that it's given us a lot of time to prepare for this.
I was going to say, it's such a great comparison, isn't it? Because there's such a significant difference there. You're right, Kai, in saying it's so immediate for September 11 to happen then, and there was a massive flow-on impact to that, right? So planes were grounded, globally, immediately, as quickly as they could land in whatever country they did. We did have, and yes, a pandemic hit, and yes, it hit fast. But there was no knowledge about it. We were watching places like China and the likes all occur. You're right, Matt, in saying some of us were prepared. So if I look at it from a cricket world, we work across the country all the time. Regional Victoria, we had to enable that flexible working years ago. We just hoped that we actually had an environment where people didn't feel like they needed to be present in the office anymore. But what we've learned, as everyone knows, people want to be in the office because they like the social aspect of it. But we could literally from Monday to Tuesday turn around and say you need to work from home, and everybody had what they needed. There are organisations that were still on computers, but having to really quickly buy a fleet of laptops to survive this. And I guess that's daunting, and that's a horror story. Imagine trying to roll out an entire fleet with everyone remote working and getting them into either a SOE or a modern or whatever environment you're in, and get people up to speed on that. That's really difficult.
I think of schools, Emma. I think of students in schools.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like cricket was very fortunate. We've just got the pace now. In that sense, we've got to deliver cricket, and we had stand downs, which was not us not being prepared for a pandemic. It was we had no idea whether we were going to have a cricket season, and that's a massive impact on us. So we're now going, okay, we have to have a cricket season. Let's make this happen. And how do we make this happen? And from a technology point of view, we need to really get behind our people and really enable them to do what they need to do, and not really get in the way of that where possible. Like, let's not put barriers up to stop them from delivering unless it's going to cause us a really big security risk or the likes, because we have to support them to deliver what they need to deliver.
So I hope that some things like on a business continuity, mental health get taken into account. I doubt whether, and I might be wrong, but that they have the fact that you might do homeschooling for 3 months. And there's certain things that I doubt we knew were coming, that were not in, that maybe we can put in next time, but hey, let's just hope there isn't a next time. And that's what Europe is busy thinking right now. They didn't think that they were going to get this wave again. And I think that's a mindset situation where the sooner, I know that Microsoft right from the beginning in March, were busy saying, we're not going to be opening the office up until September. And a lot of people are like, really? That far off? But hey, look where we are. We're past September. So I think a lot of it is a mindset situation and gearing up for that. The other thing is trying to build into this new way of working is what does work look like, and when you need to, I guess, evaluate whether people have done their work or not. Are people putting the new KPIs in, or are they just hoping that everybody can go back to the office soon so that they can measure whether people arrive at 9 o'clock and leave at 5. I'm just hoping that we learn and we reflect, and that there is a new way of working from all of this.
I have a horror story to share.
Go.
So I'm Kai, and I'm the one of the founders of analytics company called Swoop Analytics, and we sort of get exposed to analyzing a lot of data, a lot of collaboration signals from a lot of different companies. And not too long ago, we were contacted by a very large organizations, like 100,000 employees or more, who are interested in our sentiment analysis capabilities. And I thought, oh yeah, well, tell us what we're looking for. And here's the scenario. We want, as a measure of success, that 75% of sentiment is positive on our Yammer network. And we want to weed out basically all the negative conversations because we don't think that's healthy. And I thought, if you think about what Luke was saying in the beginning about having open, transparent conversations, moving from command control to hierarchy, just the fact that someone reaches out to a company to ask for that sort of thing, you can imagine where the request has come from and the need for them to feel that they have to be able to control their internal comm channels in that way. I'm glad to say that commercially I'm not happy it didn't go anywhere, but like ethically I'm sort of glad it didn't go anywhere, because I just think that's just totally the wrong thing to do. Actually, I often say that you probably want a bit of healthy argument, not the stuff that it goes sort of totally sideways, but enough healthy argument on your collaboration platforms that people feel comfortable, and there's enough trust in the system to cope with people disagreeing. So I think that's probably that was probably the best sort of example I can come from where come to think of in terms of for me, which is really a horror story.
Kai, it's interesting you say that's triggered in my mind a couple of, that can be the horror of these situations, is not so much the technology or the things, it's that attitude and approach that people bring to these things. I was sitting there thinking, you could write, a 2-word business continuity plan, which is be adaptive, right? At least you've got a plan and you're going to think about it. And then, the barriers to that are, how much do, people in positions of authority, not necessarily leaders, but I'll say positions of authority, then, trust their people to do the work. And, that sentiment thing triggered it off. And I think that's often where you can get caught as a community manager. I know one community manager says, it's not my story, I'm sharing someone else's story, but it was a horror story. They were a community manager at an organisation that had 100,000 people. And they would often get dragged into their exec team because of all sorts of issues that were going on. There was a spate of people in there. They were a global company, and there were spates of people. One company had created a hot or not group on Yammer, and I can see gasps already from some of the people on this, right? Which is like, oh no, right? So this woman was pulling her hair out, going, I keep getting all this grief. They want to turn Yammer off. It's terrible. We don't want this kind of group. It's really bad. And I just stopped for a minute and thought, well, it is really bad. There's no two ways around it. But that's not a Yammer issue. That's a behaviour issue, right? That's a culture issue. And the horror for me was that the management just wanted to turn Yammer off. They didn't want to tackle the culture. They didn't want to say, well, hang on a minute, we want to turn Yammer off so that people can't be offensive on Yammer, and not recognise, well, if they're doing that and ranking people in this hot or not, then that's a deep-seated cultural issue that needs addressing, right? And if it wasn't for things like Yammer, this is where I often see there's this real hidden benefit. It exposes this culture. And I think that could be so confronting for senior leaders, because for so long they're in their little ivory towers, they're locked away, and there's the command and control filters all their messages so that they get all what they want to hear. and then all of a sudden they're confronted with what this actual reality is for, you know, for the rest of the people in the organisation. That really struck me as a way that the cultural impacts and really thinking around and welcoming those opportunities to go, right, this is not on, this is something we really need to tackle, we really need to do. I think, you know, that's what I'm hoping it comes out of this period of, you know, the last sort of 6 months as this remote working's driven into companies, that they can start to see this, that they can start to see the value of actually listening to those bad stories, to kind of having those horror stories, because then they can deal with them rather than just pushing it down and hoping it goes away because they don't know about it.
I've got a big horror story. This one I love telling. We had a big company contact us urgently, and it was relating to private groups on Yammer. And basically, what had happened was someone on the board of this large organization had opened up a private group to everybody on the board, except one person that they were trying to remove from the board. And they had a number of discussions in this private group about how they were going to go about removing this person, the reasons why they needed to. You can imagine the thread was going, and then somebody mentioned the person instead of just putting their name in, which immediately pulled this person into the thread. Now, there's no way of reversing that. You can't move the person out of the thread. So I'm just throwing it in there because it was a nightmare moment for this company, and they were like, what can you do about it? Is there some way that you can shut this down? Well, no. That's how the tool's designed.
Yeah, I think that, and that again, that's a cultural issue, isn't it? I mean, really, that's, you know, have these conversations in the open if there's some issues there. You need to, right. But I mean, that's easy for them. I mean, it's glib and it's easy for us to say, and I know that there's lots of context around these things, but yeah, it's a scary thought, and it's those, you know, it's good that people have these horror stories, I think, because it helps people to actually tackle some of these things, right? You know, to me, that would be something, if I was confronted with that, it would be, you know, well, how do we blow the whistle on that with the board? You know, there's something not right at a cultural level, without any doubt, in that, in those things. And you know, the fear, that it is that fear, isn't it? It's the fear of actually being confronted with stuff that you probably already know but just don't want to tackle.
Actually, saying,
and it's losing the control of the timing of dealing with it. That's always what I see as a case. Yeah.
Talking to the opposite of that, there was a board in the UK on a very, very large company which they had, one of their members was incredibly progressive and would yam from the board meeting, letting the whole organization know the decisions and the conversations that were being had in basically in real time, practically. And I thought that was a lovely transparency.
Wasn't it the CEO or the ex-CEO of Rio who got in a bit of strife because he hadn't actually done anything wrong? I think he's posted something on Yammer about some business, operational, financial aspects to the Yammer network, and then someone had leaked it to the Financial Review. And I think he actually said afterwards that that he would continue to post. Well, that's until they start to blow up caves, obviously. And sorry if there's anyone here from Rio. So he's not there anymore. But he said after that he would continue to post on Yammer, and that it was up to employees to respect the privacy and confidentiality.
We actually faced something very similar, Kai, during the pandemic, where our CEO was. And one of your questions is what tools were we using for engagement during that period, and it was there's a cross. We use an enterprise social tool, which is actually Workplace, and our CEO was regularly on that on a weekly forum to ask me anything, and then we would deep dive down into Teams for the actual direct Teams and the engagement in that space. But we had staff leaking, and we can do everything possible to try and identify who was leaking, but our CEO at the time was still very adamant that it was important that staff had those updates, and they were asking me anything questions, and he was put on the spot. unfortunately, they hit the media, and that was not something we accepted. And the warning that went out was just that is not acceptable from the staff's perspective. So he wasn't going to penalise the rest of the staff because someone had done that, but it didn't mean that he was okay with what was happening. It just was we had to identify who it was, which is very hard to do. Had to identify who it was that was doing it and stop that person rather than him pulling back on information, because during the start of the pandemic and at the very point of it, the leaks was right as he was starting to announce that staff were being stood down, which was an awful time. It was so important to be transparent as much as he possibly could. And unfortunately, things were moving so quickly that he could have been doing 2 live streams a week. And the difference in those 2 live streams are significant. And so you're right in saying you just have to hope that the staff know the right behaviour, and if they don't correct the behaviour before you correct the tool. I really like to see a future where we're trying to not have tools that are tailored to us and our organisation. They're global tools and they're built for a reason. We really, where possible, should be trying to understand why they're built that way and accepting why they're built that way.
Absolutely. I feel really fortunate at NextDC that Craig, our CEO, is incredibly open. We've not had, that I'm aware of, an incident where something's been shared internally and then leaked in any way. But certainly, we're a listed company, and when it comes to the end of year results and stuff like that, Craig is incredibly open as much as he can be. So we're privy to a lot of information. On the flip side, though, I've worked in an organisation in the past, and not so much a PR thing, but more of an internal thing where there was unfortunately a death on one of our locations, and it hit the media before internal comms, and I was in internal comms at the time, was allowed to tell staff. So it's, if you're in an organisation where you have those barriers removed and people are appropriately trained on what is right and wrong, you can get to your people and talk to them about critical issues before they read it in, at that time wasn't the paper, but people were pulling it up on their computer screens and going, hey, why haven't we been told about this? And that was quite a horrific thing.
Alistair, I think you've got your hand up. I'm sure you've got lots of horror stories.
Okay, just unmuting. Can you hear me, please?
We can hear you.
Very good. I don't really have a horror story as such, I guess. I'm just really interested in hearing the stories. I really appreciated the stories as I've come through, and there's lots of accidents and there's lots of sorting out, I guess, in this sort of, well, initially I thought it was going to be about 2 months of sorting out, but it's now been 6 months of sorting out, and it's, it shows no sign of really getting any simpler or any plainer as all these things happen. But I'm interested to know, from the panel, to get your views, of those who've been talking, as to how far down the path we think we've come to genuine transformation and change. Are we 10% of the way? Are we just starting, or are we kind of halfway there? What's your general view on how it's going, if I can put it that way?
I can start with an answer.
I'm going to let Matt start.
Sorry, I think it depends on individuals. I think even within organisations, the way that perhaps leaders and those other people engage can be so drastically different from one part of the business to another. So I think some of that transformation in some areas of businesses I've seen has been phenomenal. And I think we're, 90% of the way there, and there's open conversations and they're fostering a real sense. And yet even within the same organisation, there can be other areas where it's, just not happening, right? The leader doesn't engage, doesn't want to know, is, wedded in the way that they've always done business. So it's almost, to me, that's almost it's a very difficult question to answer, but I certainly see pockets of it. I think, are there companies as a whole that are towards it? If you were to take it as an average, again, it would depend on the company. I think some are 50, 60% of the way there, and I think others are, as Rebecca's already alluded, I think some are actually in that position where they're probably at -10 because they've put some of this stuff in and then decided that they're going to take it out again. So yeah, I think it varies. I don't know what other people think.
I think now I'm glad that you jumped in, Max, while I was making my face, so I could kind of think about it. One of the things that I have been delighted by out of this crisis, if people will respect my phrasing there, is that a lot of the things from an accessibility perspective that the industry has been asking for, and when I say the industry, I mean people in roles like ours and accessibility advocates have been asking for decades even, are now expected. So being able to work from home and work remotely, have flexible working, have live captioning in tools, all of these sorts of things, not only through the rapid move to home and the need to use this digital technology, it's being rammed down organisations' throats, but they're also seeing the benefit. So, one of the challenges has always been, why do I need to design for for a person who has accessibility needs? I don't have a blind person. Insert many other examples. So the face I was making is because I don't necessarily think that we're getting a lot further, and I agree with what Matt said about, it depends on the organisation, but we've got more of an opportunity now to show the positives. And I think that's, if we speak about hope for the future, what can we take from the horror? We can take the examples of, hey, this individual who has kids and was struggling because of the commute and car breakdowns and blah, 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 they're actually more productive now and more happy and better able to serve the organisation because of this. And this person who could never have got a job with us before, because we didn't design for a person in a wheelchair or a person with hearing difficulties, etc., anxiety, ADHD, they can work for us now. So there are some definite positives now that if people like us latch onto those and show that, we can keep moving forward with those sorts of benefits. That will drive that transformation. But I'm also a bit of a negative Nancy in that, and I experience it as well. I'm really fortunate at NextDC that we're really forward thinking, but we have our challenges too, like external sharing. We're tackling the external sharing thing now. I see we've hit 5:30. Like I could talk for an hour on that one alone.
It's a good point, Rebecca. We have hit 5:30, and I know that is the show for today, the Responsive Org session, and I just want to thank Engage Squared for organizing this session, and there were a few meetings that happened to make this all go smoothly as it did. Thank you so much for to Rebecca and Emma, and for all the insights and those horror stories, and Matt, love your background as well. Not sure where you got that one, but I'm going to be using that. Kai, thank you so much as well for being on here, and obviously to Mark, who's the backbone for a lot of what we do at Responsive Org. So thank you all, and I guess if Matt, do you want to say the last few words and sign us out?
Oh, look, no, I mean, I was just going to say, look, it's mid-afternoon for me over here, so if people still want to ask questions or talk, I'm fine, right? I mean, we can stop the recording and wrap it up that way, but I mean, this is the benefit I see with these things, the sense of community. I think that, as Rebecca said, coming out of this, what is it? What are the good things that we can take? I think, people on a base level now understand the value of community, whether that's been from people responding at a local level to COVID and helping out elderly relatives, to building those connections at work because everyone's suddenly in the same boat and working remotely that they would have never built 6 months ago. So I think that's the thing that I take forward with all of this, is that we can really build on that sense of community. And I think as people start to think of us in a more community-minded way, and there was a great article, Kai, that I saw in the BBC, which I'll stick the link on the chat here, which talked about a Danish word for community spirit.
Samfundssind.
That's the one. There you go. And it's that fantastic sense that again to me is a wonderful opportunity that we can take. But yeah, other than that, we can wrap up. But I'm happy to hang around for a little bit longer if anyone's got anything else they want to talk about or ask any questions or do those things. So we'll leave it there.
Thank you to everybody that joined us today out there. Really appreciate you coming on and listening, and hopefully you got some value from this.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me.
All right, more than welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks, guys.
So I'm just still hanging around. I wanted to ask Emma a question.
Yeah, go.
Okay. So Emma,
as long as we can listen in.
Yeah, and I didn't want to ask like in a sort of when there were too many people on the call, but I mean it has been. Do you
want to stop the recording now if that's like the end of the session?
Oh yeah. It has been a tumultuous sort of couple of years for Cricket Australia, with lots of things happening in the media and the ball tampering and all these other things and players and everything. And I can imagine that.
Memories.
Yeah, Cricket Australia